Turkish and worldwide, and then you become intrigued. But the interesting thing about Sufism is it really makes you unlearn your previous knowledge and your previous dogmas. That's very interesting. So it's not like an accumulation of knowledge. You should also keep erasing your previous knowledge. You have to start changing yourself. But for many years, it was an intellectual curiosity for me. After a while, the intellect doesn't come with you, and it becomes a matter of the heart more than the mind. Yeah. That said, maybe there are many people who don't call it Sufism, they call it something else, and I think that's quite all right. These spiritual quests, they're very much like rivers, they all flow in the same direction. Maybe someone else finds a different name. That's perfectly okay, but what matters for me is not to forget the connections. We were just talking about the similarities or the common points between Sufism and the art of storytelling. One other thing is connections, because when you're a storyteller, you feel connected and you connect all the characters in the book with one another. I think, especially the genre of the novel is about building connections. And the Sufis always look at life through connections. Each and every one of us, we are interconnected. Nobody lives in a vacuum, that's what they say. Our destinies are interlinked. And today, after 9/11, we understand that better. Now we know if somebody's unhappy, in another part of the world, like in Egypt, like in Pakistan, like in Afghanistan, the unhappiness of that person might affect the happiness of someone living in Canada, right, in Buenos Aires. Now we know, and then there's a financial crisis. Now we know that we are all interconnected. Our stories are constantly intermingling. But this is exactly what the Sufis were saying all along. There are connections. That's why we shouldn't be aloof. That's why we shouldn't be arrogant towards each other. So all these very ancient teachings, of course, they tell us something. They encourage us to think more closely. But if you're asking me how much of that I put into practice, I don't know. It's one thing to talk about the rules. It's another thing to apply that. I don't know how well I'm doing that. But coming back to your first question about Ella, she's not there's not an autobiographical link, with my life in that sense. But I must say, with each and every character in the book, I felt some closeness in my heart. Even the characters that were not very favorable, like Aladdin, right? Or like the killer in the book. There are many side characters, and they were important to me as well. I do not believe in heroes. And when I write a novel, I do not believe in creating heroes. And this, to me, was a big challenge, because on the one hand, I respect Shams and Rumi, but on the other hand, I didn't want to present them as heroes. They're human beings, like all of us. Of course, they're superior in many ways, but they're human beings. So it's important to me to understand their humanness and to write about that. So what I'm trying to say is I feel a big love for each and every character, not only Ella, not only Aziz, but even the side characters in the book. Sorry, it was a very long answer, right? Keep that close.
It was a fantastic answer, really interesting. I wonder, was there another political thing though about having an American Jewish character connecting to Sufism?
Not necessarily, but what I love to do, and I do this in each and every book in a way, I love to bring characters from very different backgrounds together and see what kind of energy is going to come. I think in this life, if we're going to learn anything, we're going to learn from people who are different than us. Unfortunately, today we live in our mental ghettos. It doesn't matter what one's ideological position or cultural views are. There are many, many bubbles. There are many, many ghettos. Leftists do that, conservatives do that. In the West, I see that. In the East, in the Middle East, everywhere. We live in our protected zones, and we want to be surrounded by people who are just like us. But there's something very narcissistic about that. And in the novel, I love to bring people together, people from very different backgrounds, and to build connections and empathy among them. So in that sense, it was a deliberate attempt, yeah. And one more thing, if I may add, it excites me when I write the story of a, let's say, housewife in Boston, in such a way that when a woman reader or a male reader in Istanbul or Ankara reads about that and feels connected to that person, that's important to me. maybe that reader has never been to Boston. Maybe that reader has never had an American friend or a Jewish friend, you know? But through the art of storytelling, he understands the human, you know? So human beings. So these are important, yes.
That raises a question for me, and then I'm going to open it out because I know there are a lot of young women with a lot of questions, and that's partly why I want to ask this question. A lot of your novels have a very global address.
Koşa koşa geldim. Bir de bunu taşıyınca insan iyice bir şey, bir de ben koşarak geldim. Sonuçlanmadan zaten hararet gördüm ya. İyice hararet görsün. Çok sanmıyorum. Kişilik verze geldim. Birader de var mı? Değmez. Biraz yapalım bakın şu yükseldiği yılınca kadar. Kendisi tutuşun nerede tutuşun.
Well, this was a success, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, we'll expect more.
It's the truth about, you know, humanity. So how can I say I want only these people to read my work, or they are to me more important? For me, the human being, the human individual is important, without any labels. And it's important to understand the universality, how universally we are similar, we're connected, we're different and similar, you know, to understand all of that. So I don't make distinctions, and I think especially the art of storytelling shouldn't exclude anyone. Because stories, at the end of the day, stories belong to all of us. How can I say, you know, who they belong to each and every one of us? So I'm very open to that, you know, keeping that range really, really wide and embracing people rather than excluding.
I think that was a very diplomatic answer. I didn't mean to put you in a difficult position, but actually, as you say, it's not the author who owns the book, and all your readers in some way make these demands on you. So that's what I was implying. So, which is a good point now for some of these readers. I think we should have another question.
You said just before, I mean, you mentioned that this book is read by many different kinds of people, like nationalist people, or like religious people, very cosmopolitan read. So what's the difference of this book? Because I read your previous books, like Mahrem, Big Palas, Pinham, and Bastard of Istanbul. So I have quite a lot of your books, and I read this book as well. And it was like, you know, in the pink cover with love, you know, heart. And then it was, I mean, what was the specialty about this book that was read by many people compared to, I mean, previous books, if I may ask?
I think there are, you know, two levels, two layers